2025. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Grothman, for 30 minutes. You are recognized.
Thank you. We just got done with a very interesting week in which this House passed a budget bill, and now we proceed to actually the more difficult process in which sometime over the next 4 months we plan on passing both a reconciliation bill and appropriation bills. Between the two, we deal with all of government spending. And as the result, we have an opportunity to look at programs and examine programs the way we haven't before, particularly because we have as president someone who is somewhat of a person who promises change. And clearly his election meant that they want fundamental changes in government. Now, different programs have different goals, and just so the public understands, the appropriation bills are for what we call discretionary spending. The reconciliation bills are what are referred to as mandatory spending. But between the two bills that must eventually pass, or several separate appropriation bills, we will be looking at virtually all of the federal government. Now, different programs have different goals. And obviously, one of our goals has got to be to reduce spending, given that we have over $35 trillion in debt. But some of these programs also have perhaps intentional, perhaps unintentional goals. And these are the goals that I'm going to address today. And by the way, this is relevant whether or not we're running a over $1 trillion increase in debt every year, or whether we were in fact in a surplus situation. I'm going to look at some programs which, again, may be intentional, maybe unintentionally, penalize people who are raising children while they are married. We had a hearing on a subcommittee which I've been fortunate enough to chair a couple weeks ago. And in that hearing, Robert Rector, who works for the Heritage Foundation, found approximately 90 programs in which eligibility depended upon having a small income. In other words, you would lose eligibility for these programs if you either worked and, depending on the program, made more than $12,000, made more than $25,000, made more than $50,000. Or had somebody else in the household make more than this money. So this would include if, say, a single parent had a husband or a wife and the single parent was not working or making very little. If they married someone with an income, $30,000, $40,000, or $50,000, they would lose the benefits from that program. Now, we're all familiar with some of these larger programs. I think most people wouldn't be able to name all 90. But there are things like food share, the earned income tax credit, which requires a little bit of work, but as you work your way up and get a higher income in the company where you work, you lose that. Low-income housing, which I think is maybe the worst program of the bunch because you're given housing if you're a young person, allowing you to get out from having to live with your parents as a benefit for having a low income. Medicaid, TANF, a cash benefit, child care, Pell Grants, payments for children with some disabilities. All of these programs are conditioned upon not making too much money and, of our primary concern today, not marrying somebody who makes too much money. Frequently, these programs are in certain ways more generous than the middle class normally has. A perfect example would be Section 42 low-income tax credits. I've known people to look for housing, and the housing they get is not as lavish as the housing available in low-income housing, because the way the programs are set up, the owners of the low-income housing are encouraged to build very modern, very upscale apartments that maybe some of the average people cannot afford. As a matter of fact, a lot of the average people, even after they get married, may still be living with their parents for a while. We have our Medicaid program, which is a fine program providing health care for the poor. But again, there are a lot of people out there working who may have a $10 or $15 or $20,000 deductible on their medical payments. And of course, the government program has, in most cases, no deductible. We have the food share, and all you have to do is talk to people who work in the food stores, and they will tell you that frequently people on the food share can afford types of food that the people who are working at the grocery store feel they cannot afford. So not only do we have these programs which are conditioned upon not marrying somebody with an income, but they even have benefits that are sometimes superior to people who are not taking advantage of these programs. I mentioned Robert Rector and what he said at the relevant hearing. The penalty for getting married obviously varies from person to person, but in his example, a young person who married the father or mother of their children would be penalized by $28,000. It's therefore not surprising that if you ask around, you will find examples of people who are living together but not getting married because they want the benefits, or inevitably the percentage of people getting married when they have children falls because the generosity of the programs is such that there's a feeling, why would I get married at all? These programs also cause cheating or breaking the law because, of course, they frequently don't catch it if you're getting cash off the books. So all of these programs encourage working for cash. They also encourage, I think, earning money by doing things illegal, because that's another thing that is not reportable. We were on a different hearing the other day, and there was a feeling of somebody who I think would have to say leans Democrat, one of our witnesses, and they didn't like the fact that sometimes people are stuck in the muck and are not making as much money as other Americans. This woman did not seem to realize that one of the reasons that people sometimes make less money is because they shouldn't try to improve their lot in their employer's company, because if they improve their lot, they'll lose some of these 90 benefits. Now, a question is this penalty for getting married? And it's had a huge impact on society. I want to point out in the 1950s, 4% of the children in this country were born into a household with a mother and father. That number is now over 40%. So America has fundamentally changed because of these programs. The question is, was this on purpose, or was it an inadvertent problem caused by these programs? And I think most people would say, well, people didn't realize what they were doing. The fact that we have had the number of children born out of wedlock skyrocket from 4% to over 40% was an oversight. But one thing I think America should realize is there were always radicals out there who were trying to get rid of the American family. Karl Marx, back in the 1800s, made it clear, I think because he wanted the government to have the absolute power, that he felt that to have his socialist paradise, we had to get rid of the family. In the 1960s, the leading feminists who were celebrated by the left at that time made it clear a goal of theirs was to get rid of the nuclear family. Here's Kate Millay, who has been described as the mother of women's studies classes which dot our universities around the country. The complete destruction of traditional marriage and the nuclear family is the revolutionary or utopian goal of feminism. Linda Gordon, another prominent feminist, the nuclear family must be destroyed. Whatever its ultimate meaning, the breakup of families now is an objectively revolutionary process. Michelle Barrett, in the book, The Antisocial Family. The family sucks the juice out of everything around it, leaving other institutions stunted and distorted. So there is no shortage of radical feminists. I could quote Angela Davis, who some on the left view as a hero, as another person who was anti-family. More recently, Black Lives Matter, during their ascendancy a few years ago, and their in documents written by their founders, wanted to get rid of the so-called, the Western prescribed so-called nuclear family. And even after that was out there on the internet, before they took it down, a significant number of people in this institution, I think, showed up at rallies or whatever you want to call them, sponsored by Black Lives Matter, a group that at least initially said they were against the traditional family. So it is entirely possible that one of the reasons we have all these programs is because some of the powerful feminists and Marxists that influence what goes on in this body were in favor of destroying the nuclear family. Now people can say, "Oh, there's nobody in this conference who would yield to these radical feminists." I want to remind the public that the radical feminists are for 8.5-month abortions. Now you'd say nobody here would be for an abortion like that. Oh my goodness, my goodness. But there are individual states who have that law right now, and that's what the radical feminists wanted. You would say nobody would allow transgenders in women's sports. But again, that's what the radical feminists want. They want to blur the distinctions between men and women, and almost all Democrats in this institution follow along and vote to allow transgenders in women's sports. Same thing about transgenders in women's bathrooms. You'd say, oh, nobody in Congress would be for transgenders in women's bathrooms. But in fact, overwhelmingly, the Democrat Party is for that. Now, I'll ask yourself, if the Democrat Party is for these things, all which would have been considered absurd 40 years ago, 8.5-month abortions, transgenders in sports, transgenders in women's bathroom, is it too much to conclude that one of the reasons our government's programs are designed to destroy marriage is because the power of the radical feminists and the power of the Marxists in the Democrat Party? It's got to be in there for some reason. It's something that we should look out for. Now, I want to point out one more time that I think this is the most critical debate that we are going to have over the next 4 or 5 months as we debate our appropriation bills and as we debate our reconciliation bills. This is a debate we should have regardless of whether we are in a difficult financial plight or not. I want to emphasize, I don't care if we were running trillion-dollar surpluses around here. The idea of putting out programs, substantially generous programs, whose effect is to destroy the family is wrong. And, well, I certainly know many single parents who are doing a tremendous job and have done a tremendous job. When I talk to people in different fields, they do say the explosion in families without a mother and father at home are causing other problems for society. When I talk to law enforcement, they feel one of the root causes of the crime is the breakdown of the American family. And I'm sure, like everybody around who has been in politics for a while, you sit in these committee hearings and hear the problems of high crime and murders and such, and people have suggestions as to how to deal with them. But we don't spend enough time pointing out that one way that would certainly reduce the crime rate, maybe back down to where it was in the 1950s, is to do what we can to build up the traditional family rather than what we do now, and that is try to have as few people as possible in the family. The second thing that I am told, families of all backgrounds can have problems with drug abuse, and right now we have over 100,000 people a year dying of drug abuse. Can happen everywhere. But again, when I talk to the professionals who deal with this, disproportionately, the 100,000 people who die every year are from difficult family backgrounds, and this drug culture, I think, would be less strong in America if we did more to promote the traditional family rather than do all we can to make sure the traditional family is weakened. The third institution I'll point out that is harmed by this government's policy of penalizing traditional families is the education. And I know my friends on the other side of the aisle like to claim they care about education. When I have talked to school superintendents, when I have talked to teachers, and we talk about the additional money that has to be spent on children with certain problems, again, those kids are disproportionately from families in which, you don't have both a mom and dad there. And again, I know a lot of families like that who do a fantastic job, but I'm pointing out, if you really cared about education, you would look at these programs that have caused the children who are born into a family with only one parent there to have skyrocketed from 4% to over 40%. So I ask the chairman of the relevant committees that are going to have to deal with the appropriation bills and deal with the appropriation bills and deal with their designated spending limits on the reconciliation bill to pay particular attention to the bills, to the programs that are designed to penalize the nuclear family, which is so despised by Karl Marx and some of the radicals who were around in the 1960s and 1970s. Thank you.